Oh boy, here I go cosplaying again. Ugh, that thing is not ready to wear, but gives you a good indication of what we are up to today. Hey everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to go through this guy and hopefully going to get any of you Rick and Morty fans and cosplayers excited about this build because we've made a good start on it. It's nowhere near finished yet, as you can see. The foam armor for him is still happening. We've got feet, we've got hands, we've got other bits, and we are fresh off the back of another alien, which is Vetra and Nyx, whose video series is still going on. Anyway, who are we cosplaying? Rick and Morty fans should hopefully be pretty familiar with this character, but for those that don't know, this is
Krombopulous Michael. I'm an assassin
who shows up for one episode of Rick and Morty, and unfortunately meets a rather sticky end. However, he's a very versatile, very discreet individual who, in his own words,
I will kill anyone, anywhere. Children, animals, old people, doesn't matter. I just love killing.
And you know what? Despite only lasting a single episode, he left a big impact on the community and is quoted a lot.
Oh boy, here I go killing again.
So I thought, let's actually do a nice definitive version of this character. We have electronics, we have a fully sculpted mask, we have foam armor, and today we're going to start bringing you through this cosplay build. So let's go! So we start this build with a Monster Maker Ed head, which is this thing, which we are using as our sculpting armature. And as with all sculpts, we begin by massing out, which is defining the area that the mask is going to take up on the sculpt and giving ourselves a really nice platform for all the rest of the clay to stick to. What we do here isn't final because we can adjust where around the sculpt the mask finishes as we go along, because there's no way we're getting this right first time. We just slowly build this clay up. But because this clay is water-based, it is wed clay, W-E-D clay, it's really nice and quick to work with, so you can put it down, take it off with a blunt knife. I think Krombopulous Michael would approve of having been made with a knife. Although, he's kind of been through enough, don't you? As we go, we carry on defining the area, smoothing it out, and just trying to remove the human shape of the head underneath. Because one of the things I really wanted to capture, and one of the things I'm really proud of with Krombopulous Michael, is that profile with the lack of chin. I think that is one of the most characterful parts about this guy. He's completely chinless and in theory spineless, being an insect, right? Now we are just massing out the whole thing. The fangly bits on the front, which the Wikipedia article refers to as his lips, but like, I want to call them mandibles, but Grothomites have mandibles which go around, and he's a bit weird. We put on some eyebrows. You can see me trying to define the structure here, because once we've masked out, we do the structure. Now, the structure is what speaks to where your wearer knows the eyes and how the head will fit behind the mask. And you've got to mask that out, know where the eyes are, and also I put a center line down the middle of the face and some nice lines going across to make sure the things we're sculpting are even. And once we have the structure of the mask down, we move on to the anatomy. The anatomy is what makes this guy look like an alien, rather than just a bunch of clay over the head. One of the things we want to take extra care to make sure it's nice and even. We even use a set of calipers to make sure that we have the right distance between our center line. And because sculpting circles is a fool's game, we use the rim of a glass to squish in the eyes. Tried a ramekin, I tried some bottles, I tried a good few things, but this thing turned out to be the exact right proportions for the rest of the head, in my opinion at least. And that gives us a perfect circle, so when we come to 3D print the eye sockets, because we'll be 3D printing, mounting these as magnets so we can see through the goggles, it gives us a standard circle that our 3D print and maybe even cast of the eyes will work for in the future. Quite early in this sculpt, we do mass out the fangly bits on the front and his mohawky bits. These bits. And his antenna. Because he's just a cool version of Greedo. Don't hate me, Star Wars fans. We put these on not because we are going to then use those as a final sculpting bit. We put them on to give context to everything else we're sculpting. Because we just put placeholders in. So everything is still within scale. And once we come to the end of our first sculpting session, because this is water-based clay and we're worried about the water evaporating off the sculpt if we leave it alone for too long, we cover the entire thing in plastic. Either saran wrap, cling film, or, as I do here, just some plastic bags put over it. We spray it down with a lot of water so that there's more water to evaporate over time, because it's going to be a couple of days before we come back to this, and we want to put the sculpt to bed. Between sculpting sessions, we actually put some time into another project, which was assembling this 3D printed rifle, which, as I said before, I think K. Michael would be quite proud of. However, whilst doing it, we accidentally knocked the sculpt a couple of times. But because this is water-based clay, it is lovely and malleable, which makes it easy to damage, but also easy to repair. So here you can see the big chunk I took out of his facial fangly bits, and so we have to spend a little bit of time repairing those. He's been through a lot worse. I'm going to carry on playing that clip until I figure out how he escaped, because he's got to have escaped. I'm thinking clones. Now we come back to him another day when we are determined to finish the sculpt. It's been about 2 hours worth of sculpting time so far to get to this point. As you can see, he's starting to really come along because he's quite a simplistic shape. One of the good things about coming back to this later is the morning of this sculpt, I quickly jumped onto Fusion 360, modelled up some half domes of the same diameter of the circles for the eyes that we put in, and 3D printed them. Real quick, real rough, but we're going to use them for spacers in the mask. You might notice this casting doesn't have those domes on them. That's because they are just there to add context, like massing out his antenna and his fangly bits and all that at the start, so that everything is sculpted relative to them. And so we just whack them in there, and he already looks so much more like a Krombopulous, and I love it! You might notice from the branding on this footage, this entire thing was streamed on Twitch. I broadcast the whole sculpt, all of the foam work that I've been doing, the entire costume will be made live with our community, so you guys can come and watch it done live and ask any questions you want about it live on the stream. However, if you're not able to make it, that's fine. Ask us questions here. I love this. Now that we have the anatomy and the structure all down pat, we want to start adding details. So here's the detail stage. I'm going around the head, ad-libbing this whole sculpting stage now, because I want to give the impression of chitinous plates on the head, but I also don't want to make this look too hyper-realistic. I know, it's a bit big-headed to think I can make it hyper-realistic, and I'm not going for something that looks exactly like this fan art, which I love, by the way. It's a big inspiration of this mask, but I wanted it to be a bit more like an ant head, where the chitinous plates of the ants kind of almost merge into each other. They're definitely there, but they're very smooth, the lines between them. We still need to go around and sketch out where these plates are going. I kind of just make it up as I go along and do what I think looks good, putting lines between features where you would expect a little bit of articulation, because these lines would allow for articulation for the final creature. And we also use this to define different anatomical structures, like the area around his face danglies. His face balls. Let's just admit it, they're testicles on his face. That's all Rick and Morty design is! It's genitals all the way down! Because this is a full head mask, we do have to make sure we are putting details all the way around. But I don't want to overcomplicate this build, because it does come from a cartoon character who has a very simple design. Once we get all of the creases for the chitinous plates down, I want to let the surface of the clay dry a bit, so we're able to put, because the surfaces of insects have a very distinct knobbly texture on them. So what I end up doing is taking my sponge, mopping up all of the clay dust that has accumulated on the table, and patting that over the surface, which helps dry it out. Because it's water-based clay, the drier the surface is, the more details it can take and the more resilient it is. So you're able to put a finer texture into it. Later, I actually go around and use some talcum powder, because the clay powder, the clay dust, is pretty bad for your lungs. So maybe don't do that. And as you can see, we start to get a very nice fine texture on this sculpt, which will come over really well on our latex cast later down the line. The distance between the lines is still a little bit too much for me, in my opinion. So what we end up doing is using a sponge, using our fingers. We use the fact that the clay is quite dry to push the edges of these creases together just a bit. So we end up with a nice, subtle, very defined line. Find an organic line that is definitely there, would be very hard to sculpt in first try. And also the little bumps that our fingers add give it a really nice organic texture, give it an organic look, which I'm quite happy with. Whilst you're watching this, take a moment to comment below on what your favourite Rick and Morty secondary character is. Mine was Reverse Giraffe. I think he looked fantastic. I just wanted to see him wobble about lots. Anyway, we then move on to doing his antenna. I actually end up cutting off the things that we masked out. Again, not the worst thing he's been through, so I don't feel too bad about doing it to the character. And then I mush together some rolled up clay, split it in half so they're both even, and put them back on. We're going to be cutting them off again anyway for the mold making process, but we still need them done right in context for the rest of the character. You need to think about that quite a bit, is the context for the different anatomical structures that you are sculpting. Especially when you don't have a definitive turnaround reference, because he's not a 3D character. And a lot of cosplay is about choosing what details you elaborate on, tone down, being an informed maker about your cosplay. And that's my university education coming in there. With the antenna done, I then move on to what is probably the hardest bit, which is the fangly bits on the front of the face. I have to cut them off first so I can make sure the area behind them is sculpted well. Then we need to start trying to build them up. Honestly, I should have put an armature in them to make them a bit more resistant and a bit more structured. So when I was sculpting on them, I could add clay to them easier. But this was kind of a rush job, and I'm really happy with how they came out. They do not have the exact same shape as his face, because we want to put an armature in there, which will make them move as I speak. We're going to put some wire in there, a little chin strap on the inside, and hopefully we can get them to move when I talk. And then the final part of the sculpt, where we build up his mohawk. Is it really a mohawk if it's made out of spines? I don't know. Let's just play that clip again. Oh, what's wrong with me? We try and make them natural, so they go from small to tall to small again. But again, we don't have definitive references for a lot of this stuff. Now that we're happy with that bit, we revisit our texturing stage, where we actually start to take talcum powder and pat down the whole thing to close up gaps, to fill bits in, build things out a tiny bit, and just to get the surface ever so right to make it look that perfect insectoid boy. He is, of course, the best Krombopulous, if he even is a Krombopulous. The truth is out there. I mean, it's underneath his car because of... Yeah, okay, last time I'm playing that. And there we go, we have as accurate a representation of the character that we can, ready to be moulded. I'm so happy with this entire thing. It's a little while before we get around to doing our moulding and casting, and I'll be honest, the moulding and casting for this was an absolute pain. Looking back at this, what could I have done better? One of my big complaints with my own work here is I wish I hadn't ended the mask around there. The idea of this was that this would make it really easy to take on and off at a convention, because this is going to be quite an awkward mask to wear for a long time. But I wish I'd kind of put a split down there, maybe with Velcro so it would overlap with itself, because my hair is going to come out of there, so I'm going to have to think of a way to get around that. And now back to the kind of more boring, almost admin side of this, where we have to put this sculpt to bed, ready to be moulded in a couple of days' time. And because it's water-based clay, as I said before, we need to cover it in plastic. I actually wrapped some kitchen towel, which had been wet in water, around the extremities, because the thinner the clay is, the easier time it's going to have to dry out. And when it dries out, this stuff will contract, crack, and fall off. I have lost days of work to not storing my stuff properly. But that's how we got to the point where we are at with this cosplay. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I hope you're enthusiastic to see where this goes. Remember to like this video, comment any questions you have, and here is a preview of the next video where we mould, cast and assemble the mask before getting down into the nitty-gritty of all the foam work for this character. So thanks for joining us, and I'll see you next time. Hayze, can you help me with my cosplay? Can do! Sorry, headphone users.